Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ran Yan, the Executive Director of Lewis Latimer House Museum, home of Black inventor and humanist Lewis Latimer. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that even though our event is being held virtually today, the Lewis Latimer House Museum is located in Flushing, Queens, the ancestral and unceded territories of the Munsee, Lenape, and Martiniquak people. Today's Zoom event will be recorded. Rest assured, your screen won't be recorded unless you speak on camera. Please feel free to click on the view button in the upper right corner to switch between speaker view and gallery view. You can also view or hide the live transcriptions by clicking on the CC button at the lower right of your Zoom window. And now, before we delve into the conversation with Shervone Neckles and the Beam Center, I would like to share a short video with you that the Beam Center has produced for the Beacon project. Bear with me a second.
It's also about illuminating our existence, right? So there's so many of us that have felt isolated and have felt unheard, unseen, forgotten, marginalized. And Lewis Latimer, at many times in his life, actually experienced those same things. And so this project to me is really about illuminating our existence, really trying to shed light around someone's presence when you approach, or if you're in proximity to the piece. It illuminates light, it emits light. It's just acknowledging that you're there. It's a kind of saying, in a way, symbolically, I see you, and us being able to learn the story of Lewis Latimer, all of us, Beam Center, the fellows, myself as the artist, and all those we come in contact with, we now feel charged to make sure that more people know about Latimer, so that it feels as though this is this journey that we're taking together to bring light and share light, preserve it, and pass it on.
Seeing as the beacon's all about like the light bulb, that light essentially represents just coming out of your shell and expressing yourself and opening yourself to more possibilities in your life.
Sort of like hope and happiness and just all those positive feelings combined.
Okay, and that was
Anyways, I think we're ready to start this meeting, shall we?
These days,
get out of this video for YouTube. That was a really nice introduction to the Beacon project. And so I would like to start the discussion with Shervone Neckles, who's an interdisciplinary artist based in Queens, who of course designed the Beacon installation. And Shervone, you've been kind of involved with us at the Latimer House in one way or another for a couple of years now. And I know you've been focusing on really bringing history to life in your artistic practice. and in connection to the community. So can you tell us more about your background and the evolution of your artistic vision and practice? And maybe also talk about how you came across Lewis Latimer.
Thank you, Ran, and welcome to everyone. Thank you all for taking the time out to extend your day on Zoom and being with us this evening. So I guess in order to talk about Beacon, you're right, Ran, I need to talk about like where it all comes from, where's the motivation for the way I produce, how I produce. And so, you know, so much of my thinking and making process and my work is really about being first generation American, growing up in a very densely populated Caribbean community in this pocket of Flatbush, Brooklyn, raised to young Grenadian Caribbean parents. And because they had just arrived to the States and they were young, we literally grew up together. We had to make sense of the world together and make a sense of place and belonging for ourselves. And so a lot of my work is about weaving together my Afro-Caribbean, Grenadian aesthetics and cultural expression and values with my American identity, and then also my personal interest in like history, nature, and sciences. And it's from that I'm then able to explore concepts like ancestral memory. I'm able to explore, self-defining identity narratives, and also my Black girlhood to womanhood to even motherhood now trajectory. And then also the tensions with being first generation American. There's a duality there. There's this, for me, there's this need for this kind of cultural preservation, but then there's also this kind of cultural expectations, that the weight of that I sometimes feel and I'm constantly exploring in my work. And so there's always been this fascination with like interiority for me, right? And that's actually where ideas start for me, with these kind of internal curiosities and wanting to understand myself, understand those complexities and nuances. And it's from, and then also make a connection to my family lineage from that internal work that I'm doing. And it's from that kind of internal work that I'm then able to turn that externally, right? And start to respond to my surrounding environment. And so, for instance, recently I've been doing extensive work around my great-grandfather. And he wrote an autobiography, and I have been really just fascinated by him telling his own story. And I really believe, based on what I've been reading, that he really wrote that for the next generation, my generation and my son's generation, because he wanted us to know who we were as a family, who we were to each other, who we were in terms of our connection to the land of Grenada, our contributions, what we did, who we were, how we, our activities. And because those are the things that get lost oftentimes. And so he was just so meticulous about his record keeping and how he would tell that story, that it actually now, because of that, I've been able to trace my lineage back 5 generations on the island of Grenada, and also be introduced to our early, like the first stages of us acquiring land, right? And so that's just opening me up to a ton of new work, right, that I'm excited about. And it's a very similar trajectory that I took with working with Lewis Latimer. Once you reached out to me in fall of 2017, Ran, inviting me to submit a proposal, and then inviting me to the house to learn about Lewis Latimer. That was like opening up so many things for me, because one, like I said, I grew up in Brooklyn, I live in Queens, and I'm really trying to ask myself here, how is it this is the first time I'm really hearing about Lewis Latimer? Why haven't I heard about him in elementary school and primary in elementary school, or high school, or even in higher education? And so instead of responding to the frustration, what I did was start to ask a series of questions, and then started going into the archives and just tracing and tracking that history and exploring all this fascinating history about American history, right? Because going through Latimer's lineage, you start to learn a different part of American history that you don't normally hear. And so really fascinated and excited about that. And so that's where the early stages of Beacon came to be.
Great. And now about Beacon, can you talk a little more about how the idea came to be? You mentioned visiting Latimer House, learning about him, and how did you incorporate Latimer's legacy in the design of Beacon, and especially including the use of archives and source materials, and how does that approach fit into the scope of your work?
Oh yeah. So that's, primary source materials is such a constant for me. Similar to like I was saying about my great-grandfather, Lewis Latimer left a ton of treasures for us, really. I mean, the house is one, right? And going to the house, visiting and connecting with historians and educators who can give you the full context of his existence is one. But then you have the ability to go to the Queens Central Library and actually go in and take a deep dive into the archives, right? His personal papers, his records. And there's something to be said about the intimacy of literally seeing handwriting, right? And letters and journal entries and his mechanical drawings and his patents. There was something about that that just felt so intimate. And also he felt it's like it was a humanizing process, right? So this historical figure no longer felt so distant. He felt tangible, he felt real. And because I'm doing this work for myself in my own family archives, I could see the parallels now, right? Because the same records I'm studying in my family, they go back to the mid 1800s as well. So I'm talking about the same time period, just in different parts of the globe. So it's becoming really tangible for me. And I'm starting to see reflection of my grandfather and Lewis Latimer, and reflections of Lewis Latimer and my grandfather, and even reflections of myself. So it's also an empowering thing too, because, I can relate, I'm an artist, right? And he's an artist. And so all of a sudden the things that he was able to achieve with all the things, the barriers, real barriers in place, made it feel like, well, I can be more ambitious too, right? I can be more expansive in my thinking, but also wanting to tell his story in a more ambitious way, right? So creating a larger than life-size sculpture proposal for that. I felt like I could be that ambitious and do that with because I had this direct contact and connection with his archives and just seeing what he was able to achieve in his life. Yeah.
That's so fascinating, the connection, intergenerational connection, and the entire diaspora connection. So, and for
Ran, I'm sorry, I also forgot to mention that, which is really important, that it was there that I also discovered that 1881 patent, and then for the electrical lamp, right? And it's the way he drew the filaments, right, that I wanted to pay real close attention to. And then it's the 1882 patent for the processing of the carbon filament that I really wanted to bring to light, because most folks don't know about that. But I brought those two in particular because as an artist, there's like, people always celebrate the thing that comes to fruition, but sometimes forget the steps between that got there. And so wanting to celebrate the 1881 patent, because you could literally see, when you start to read the documents, you start to see the traces of, this is where the spark happened. It's in that patent and that invention there that begins the process of him figuring out that, it's the specific processing and manufacturing of the carbon filament that makes it last longer, and it's more, and can possibly be more accessible. So that's what I wanted to bring forward in this body of work in terms of Beacon.
Great. That's I find it amazing that you as an artist and Latimer as an inventor kind of have this resonance both as creators, so you can kind of interpret and attempt to understand his process in coming up and bringing those inventions to life. And also Beam Center, I would like to invite you to join the answering this, and maybe you could kind of introduce yourselves or your background when you answer the question. So, and also Shervone, could you all tell me the role of partnership in this work, and maybe outline the planning process behind the collaboration for us, especially for such a large scale installation? How did the collaboration influence and shape the final product of the Beacon project? Maybe Shervone, you can tell us like what changed or what didn't change between the initial idea and the final result.
Go ahead, Shervone.
So, you know what, this is definitely a two-part answer. And what I'll do, Brian, is I will take the first leg, which is just talking about like, you know, the importance of the who, why, and who I needed to work with. And then you all would talk about the logistics. So, you know, it was important for me. I had created this proposal, but I sat on it for a while because it was important that I find the right partnership. You know, it needed to be, I needed to partner with folks who really understood the significance of this project, beyond it being an object or an artwork. You know, they understood it as being a symbol of like, that had layered meaning. It's a gesture of remembering. It's a gesture of public acknowledgement. It's a gesture of like a celebration of life and Lewis Latimer's genius, really, and what he's contributed to us in society. And so it was important for me to find partners where we can establish from the beginning a real strong understanding of Lewis Latimer's significance in our collective American history. That was for one. The second was an alignment, right? We had to have an alignment and a belief in this effort, and develop a sense of care around this project, right? Everyone cared about it, cared about Lewis Latimer's legacy being told as accurately as possible, right? And then also becoming champions of him, right? We all go out there and we share the word, make sure that more folks know about what he's done, what he's contributed, and how we're benefiting from his contributions. And so to begin that process, I knew I needed to embed into my proposal visits to Lewis Latimer House. And so when working with Beam Center, that was one of the #1 things when I submitted my proposal. I had incorporated all of these things, these visits to the Lewis Latimer House Museum, collaborating with them, learning about the history, because that's where it starts, right? That's where the belief, the care, understanding the importance, that's where it started. So now I'll pass it on to Beam to talk more about the logistics, the steps to getting to the fruition of Beacon.
Thanks, Shervone. Thanks, Ren. My name is Brian. I'm the executive director. I'll sort of start the response and then probably hand it off to Mitchell Dose, who was so responsible for guiding the process. You know, and I'll try to be brief because there's so much that Shervone describes in her thought process, her motivation, that connects so deeply with everything that we do at Beam Center. And you know, one of the things that we joke about a lot at Beam Center is how we live in this this incredible ecosystem of coincidence and kismet, and the idea that we would put out a call out into the world for our second New York City Beam project and have this proposal come into our inbox with all of that behind it, and match so perfectly with what our intentions for the young people we work with are. You know, just as two examples, the notion of self-defining narratives and autonomy and agency that Shervone talks about. That is the essence of what we want to make real for the young people that we work with. The second would be that notion of ambition and ambitiousness, of imagining what can be made tangible, both from your own ideas and in collaboration with others. So and not to mention all of the sort of more surfacey, oh, well, we work a lot with electronics and we work in schools and we show kids how to make things. And those were like, oh yeah, well, that's just amazing. But when you go deeper and see those connections, just made it all the more exciting for us. So very briefly, what we do is build big things with young people. And again, this was our second project that we're building in New York City. We have built over 26 of them at our summer camp in New Hampshire. I'm gonna hand it off to Mitchell to talk about the logistics of the collaboration.
Thanks, everyone. I am Mitchell. I'm a project director at Beam Center, and I have been involved a lot in the process of translating a large vision or artistic-led project, or the designs that have contributed to all of our Beam Camp projects, and sort of make the translation between this vision and how you end up making it in the real world. And all, as Brian was saying, all the hard and technical skills, but all the sort of driving inspiration and day-to-day dedication that can be given as an experience or shared as a collaborative experience with the youth that we work with. And the way it has played out with this New York City Beam project that this was the second version of, is we were able to connect to a very core group of young adults and older youth that we call fellows. They are part of a dedicated program that involves, yes, the technical training. In the case, we'll go into the more, some of the more technical aspects of what it involved. And we train them over a series of months, and they do some introductory work. And in the beginning, we had also had the pleasure of involving this sort of historical pedagogical component of this project, which was very fascinating and exciting for us to incorporate such a dense history, as much as all the incredible sort of technical aspects of the project. So over the course of a series of months, we ostensibly train and build this project, and it gets installed somewhere. We've been very lucky to be involved with Latimer House, to have such a spectacular and the absolute perfect setting to finally display a completed project, which is the result of a lot of really hard, real hard work, and a lot of making mistakes and discovering along the way, and doing that as an entire group with this very special group of fellows who are the real creators of the piece.
Great. And you kind of touched on it already, but could you all talk a little more about the educational component? You talked about the fellows. Maybe give us a little more background of where you found them, and what was their role? How long was their involvement?
Sure. Yeah. So we had the pleasure of also collaborating with human resources to connect with a very specific group of youth who are identified through their services. So we were very lucky to sort of bring in the youth that we are dedicated to serving and offering a deeper experience in this way. So they approached us with which is a very traditional sort of specific job training opportunity for youth. And we sort of were able to mildly blow them away with this experience that we're able to offer. And for the fellows who were able to join us, I think it was maybe a surprise at like what we were involving in this multifold project. So
Mitchell,
as we went along. And yeah, Cassie, please jump in on that too.
I'll jump in because this was my big starring shining moment. My name is Cassie. I worked with Beam Center for many years, but this was really a new, exciting engagement for us, working with human resources administration, because they were looking for alternative engagement opportunities, because previously most of the opportunities presented to the young people are OSHA training, or going to security school to get your security license, or becoming a sous chef, you know, a background in the kitchen. So they were really very specific on wanting to look for young people who were interested in art, electronics, being creative. So all of the contacts that we made at HRA worked really hard and worked really closely with the young people that they know to really find out the people who were ready and open for a new experience. So we felt extremely lucky that everyone came in not necessarily ready for the full Beam experience, which is what we provide, which is deeply personal and way beyond the scope of just becoming trained to learn how to make something spectacular. And that happens over time. And that's part of the role that I feel I really help with, being the bridge between someone who is not a trained fabricator, but someone who loves being around that artistic and creative energy and thrives off of it. So that's how we started our partnership with HRA, and I'll let Mitchell, Ran had some other questions. This of course started before the pandemic. We started with around 16 or 17 young people and ended up with a real core group of 12. And maybe throughout the Zoom call tonight, we'll find some of our pictures from our trip to the Latimer House, like literally 8 days before the entire world shut down, which is one of my best moments of my entire life, being able to have that trip with everyone. But we really, really bonded quickly with this group of young people, because the beginning stages of our orientation for any large project that we work on are really getting people comfortable in the fabrication spaces. So Mitchell and the other team members really get them comfortable with carpentry, with metalwork, and give them a chance to bond with each other and create different pieces that actually have nothing to do with the large beacon piece, to start them getting comfortable and confident in their own hands. So after the pandemic kind of shut down our in-person opportunities, we shifted to meeting online as much as possible, at least once a week, where we continued to grow our emotional bond as a group of folks, because once they met Shervone and heard her story and saw some of her previous work and understood how large we wanted this piece to be and how important it was that they were the ones who were making it, it really felt like no one wanted to let go of the connections that we made. So we met online for a few months, and then we took a short break over the summer. And then when we felt comfortable again, enough to be in a space. Luckily, our shop has a huge garage door. We opened up the garage door. It was a little chilly, but we had masks on, and people were back within a few months beginning the actual fabrication of the project. And I'll pass it on to Mitchell.
I think and maybe we'll talk more about the fellow experience in general, and maybe just to add one more anecdote to that. Yes, we were lucky enough to be building this piece in the midst of this pandemic, and able to build it in a safe way. And Kamari Blake, one of our fellows, has since shared a really nice and small reflection, not small, but it's very large for him, in that it really, beyond all the technical things of which he became extremely proficient and would actually probably not aggrandize himself because he's very humble. Noted most distinctly that even in amidst the pandemic, this project got him out and opened up and experiencing more of the world in general, and working with people. And I think that's just a nice reflection that is the lasting effect that he experienced amidst all the thing that standing in front of this huge, incredible, epic piece of artwork with all of this history and his own history involved in it. He was able to really acutely reflect what impact it had. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I remember the the visit from the fellows and the Beam Center staff. I think Shervone was also there. It was such a nice experience, and Alex, our education associate, gave them a really nice tour. But then the pandemic suddenly happened. So you already talked about how to continue engaging the fellows during the pandemic, and Shervone and everyone else, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how the pandemic shifted the project in other unexpected ways.
So it's actually interesting because, I think you heard already that Beam Center is pretty amazing in how they are they make ambitious projects. So, and they work in that manner too. So surprisingly, of course things slowed down and the timeline changed, but they worked it remarkably. I mean, we kept our planning meetings. We met continuously, like we said, weekly, constant updates. We stayed pretty much on target, once we were back in they were back in the fabrication space making in the fall. So really it was just, I'm blown away constantly about like just the work ethic and the commitment, but I feel like what changed the most was the meaning of Beacon, right? Because now we were making this because we wanted to commemorate and celebrate a historical figure has done so much, but now we were kind of working off of and energized by that Latimer spirit here, because 2020 was a really intense period for everyone. Everyone's lives have been impacted by this. And so the idea of making something that would bring light, like literally we are creating something that's bringing light, that is meant to illuminate and emit light and radiate, just felt like the right thing to be doing and the right thing to be putting our energies towards, right? Because it has so many symbolic meanings now, more than we had ever envisioned and imagined when we started the project. And I'll pass it on to my Beam colleagues to add to that.
Well, I couldn't say it any better. It became the beacon we were all reaching for, I have to say, and I know my colleagues here can remember this, in President Biden's acceptance speech, I think prior to the inauguration, but after the election, he referred to a beacon for the globe, and despite my cynicism in general, that broke me because it all came together right there. It's like, oh, you know what? Maybe we're all going to be, those of us who have managed to make it through are going to be okay. So it very much for us as a staff, for our young people, Beacon was more than just a project. It was our way to make it through it all.
That's beautifully put. And it is really a valuable pedagogical tool for the fellows, but it's also kind of an educational tool for the general public. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. To me, especially because I have this education background, conversation is always central to learning for me. And I really look at Beacon as a conversation starter, right? Especially because of when we were installing Beacon, I saw exactly what I wanted to see happen. You know, passerbys asking each other questions, right? Shouting out to us in the garden, what are you doing? What are you working on? And that's exactly what I wanted this to do. I had envisioned this piece being like, to have presence, and it does. I also wanted it to be an interactive piece, right? To get the active participation of the public. I envisioned this piece carrying memory and also communicating about history, and it does all those things. But most importantly, I wanted it to spark curiosity, right? To make someone want to read the signage, to want to knock on the door at Lewis Latimer House and say, can you tell me what's going on here? To stop a person who's passing by and ask someone, what's that about? That's what I wanted this piece to do, to be a real conversation starter, to spark curiosity and start conversation. And so far, it's been doing that.
Great. And speaking of curiosity, maybe everyone, you can just share a little bit about your main takeaways from this entire process, and maybe are there things about Lewis Latimer that you actually, even though you've learned about him through this project in depth, but are there things about him you still don't know and you would like to know more about, either about him or his inventions?
I'm gonna pass it to my colleagues to start, and then I'll wrap it up.
I'll start just quickly. And Brian will fill in the details that I'll leave out, but just knowing that one of the stories, there was something where Edison needed to send something in, and he sent Lewis Latimer to Canada, and so just thinking about the time, like knowing how long it takes me to get from Bed-Stuy to downtown Brooklyn, but Lewis Latimer was traveling to do a last minute errand to Canada, where he's not even getting any credit or anything, so just understanding, Shervone mentioned, Beam Center and Shervone and Lewis Latimer House, how much we feel like this duty and this like urgency to want to complete things that we've started, and this whatever it takes to get it done. That's something that has been instilled within me from my family, but also completely ratified with my experiences with Beam Center, because we look at every single thing we do, whether it be a small thing of like making sure we thanked someone for dropping off some extra cups, or making sure we finish this huge, beautiful project in the middle of a global pandemic, and having that sense of urgency, and then people are drawn to it. So literally knowing that kind of infectious energy can be passed on. And when I see Beacon, that's what I think about, knowing that, obviously together we are more powerful to do anything, but knowing that the urgency to take care and the specifics of anything large and small is really what, brings us together and makes us really feel proud.
Yeah, and I mean, I had limited knowledge when we began this of Latimer's achievements, and I had no knowledge of his personal story, the way he lived his life, and I am struck by, and I think I probably talked about this in the early days, about how someone's sort of drive to express themselves visually through drawing can take that person to that sort of the edge of innovation, and to great distances, and it can just start with a love of drawing and a love of expressing oneself in the most intimate ways. And that is and to take all the steps in between those things, you know, from getting your drawing right to being able to go to Montreal to supervise the installation of an unprecedented electrical grid. That is, we talk to our young people about that all the time. So many young people give up on their fascinations, their early fascinations with drawing, because they think it's not relevant to their future. And we're always reminding them that imagination is what takes you to the place that you want to go. Job training doesn't take you to where the place you want to go. And learning more and more about Mr. Latimer's life and how he lived it, and the way he managed to do all those things and still be a man of values and just someone who thought about the world not just for himself, but to make it better for others. It's kind of an endless story that I will never stop asking about and wanting to know more about.
Wow, that was really, really nice. Mitchell and Shervone, do you have anything to add?
I guess I'm always continually struck by the genius of this small little carbon filament that Latimer definitely completely understood the process around in order to patent it, and the sort of magic of this almost like beyond metaphysical property that was so needed at the time. It's almost like magic or alchemy at this point, because trying to recreate it as a large version and all of the technical feats that we sort of had to prototype and test and remake and continually learn about, still feels like a continually very intimate thing to know that we were connected to this literal source of light, the filament, and to know that he had the same kind of relationship to knowing it completely and understanding it completely and knowing what it would do for the world is really fascinating to me. I would actually like to learn more about what's actually going on in that situation, and I need to do my homework. But yeah, that's my small anecdote.
Well, echoing what my colleagues have already said, and then adding to that, yeah, I'm humbled by this process, seriously. And what remains the through line for me in all aspects of his life, the way he was with his family, his daughters, his wife, the way he carried himself with community members, all the need to gather with people and bring community leaders together, civil rights leaders together, thinkers together to discuss, equity and the advancement of the Black community. And then his work as an electrical engineer and his innovations, just really, I remain really inspired by that. And just how he was so committed to wanting to just improve the quality of life for people, right? So he did it for himself, he did it for his family, was working on doing that for the Black community, but also just doing it for everyday Americans. He was, all the inventions, when you look at what he improved, he was constantly improving things that either existed already or just advancing something that would change the quality of someone's life, the everyday person's life. And I just, and never did it for acknowledgement, did it because it would benefit others, right? It would make someone's life a bit more easier, lighter, more comfortable, more convenient, and really appreciating that and thinking about that as I carry myself and how I operate in the world, right? But then I also have to say, just getting down to like going through his archives and seeing all the things that he did and the way he lived his life, he introduced me to some folks, right? When I was learning about who would gather at his house, I was like, oh, okay, I want to learn more about him by learning about who he gathered with. So like Jessie Fawcett, this poet and writer that was in Harlem, I want to learn more about her because of her gathering with him. James Weldon Johnson, the writer and the civil rights leader and the leader of the NAACP at one point, wanted to know more about those folks. And studying about him also led me to, in some strange roundabout way, led me to Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first Black woman MD who received her MD in her medical license and became a physician in the US in 1864, I believe. So just studying him, I ended up learning about her. And I think there's some overlap between them. And his parents, Lewis Latimer's parents, George and Rebecca Latimer. So again, it's just learning about him has opened me up to wanting to learn about so many other folks that needs to be acknowledged and celebrated as well.
Great. So my last question for you all. So Beacon now is on view at the Latimer House till August 15th, 2021. What will happen after that? What lies in the future for the installation?
Well, we're very happy that the piece will make a reverse journey, life journey. In mid-August, the piece will be moved to downtown Brooklyn. We're not exactly sure. There are two possible installation sites, but it will be very accessible to passersby, very highly trafficked areas. And after that, we would very much like to see it travel to Washington, D.C., because we believe that Mr. Latimer deserves to take his place amongst the most important thinkers in American history. And we'd love to, we envision it sitting right outside one of those museums in Washington, D.C. And, if you don't dream it, it doesn't happen.
I'm going to add to that, Brian, that one of the main reasons why we're so excited about it traveling to downtown Brooklyn too is because that's where Lewis Latimer lived for a period of time from, I think it's like 1893. He was there till about 1902. Downtown Brooklyn on Adelphi Street between Willoughby and Myrtle Avenue. So we're kind of tracking all of the places where he lived. We're really excited about that too.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Before we go into questions from the participants, by the way, please feel free to put in any questions in the chat. Since we're speaking about upcoming plans and the future, I would like to invite our education associate Alex to also talk a little bit more about what's coming up for the Beacon program series and also other things going on at the Latimer House.
Thank you so much. I feel like I learned so much from this conversation. It's so inspiring to hear more about the process of Beacon and to hear more about the Beam Center. So thanks everyone for sharing. So I'm really happy to share our upcoming program offerings with everyone. You can find more information about all of these events on our website or by signing up for our e-newsletter. And I'll put the links in the chat in just a minute. If you have any questions or like assistance with booking, you can always email me. I'll also link my email in the chat, but it's education@lewislatimerhouse.org. So the first program I'd like to share is the next virtual event in our Beacon series. During the week of Juneteenth, we will host a panel discussion with Hugh Price and Dr. Kenneth R. Manning. Hugh Price is the great-grandnephew of Lewis Latimer and the previous CEO of the National Urban League. Dr. Manning is a prominent historian and professor at MIT and the co-author of Blueprint for Change, The Life and Times of Lewis H. Latimer. And this is sure to be a fascinating and rich conversation. To sign up for our newsletter to receive the email, the event invite. And then second, in another collaboration with the Beam Center and in particular with the fellows that we all heard so much about earlier, we're having a virtual STEAM workshop on Thursday, June 10th for kids and families. And in this workshop, participants will learn how to paint using light. So definitely an offshoot of all the illumination we've been discussing tonight. So please join us or pass along this information to any young people that you think might be interested in exploring STEAM with us. But really any age can participate. You do not have to be a kid. And then we will be holding our 2-week summer camp virtually this year. So please feel free to share with any of your young people who might be interested in art, coding, animation, and engineering. We have so many fun projects in store. We're going to do a lot of hands-on making as well, so it won't just be sitting in front of the computer. And registration is open. If you register by June 6th, you can take advantage of our early bird discount. And then we are offering virtual field trips for K through 12 students still. So book a trip, learn more about Lewis Latimer, his achievements, and experience our hands-on projects through live virtual instruction. And again, you can find more information about all of these programs on our website. And I will be posting the links in the chat right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I see a first question from the audience member. When would you suggest a good time to plan a visit to Latimer House? Our garden is now open every Friday and Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. In addition to Beacon, we have another outdoor installation on view right now, so definitely worth the visit. And the museum itself, the interior, we're planning for a reopening later this summer, so please stay tuned. Any other questions from the audience? We have so many amazing panelists here ready to answer. Hugh?
Right. I would just like to say that it's useful reminder all of us that Lewis Latimer's 175th birthday comes up in 2023. So I think it'd be wonderful if somehow the installation can travel the country and certainly sort of reach a peak of exposure in 2023. I don't know what the plan for that is and how it might happen, but it would be fantastic if it is. It's a great work of art and also a great conversation starter about Latimer. Great teaching instrument for teaching. Be terrific to have a game plan. Maybe there's schools or the campuses of HBCUs or who knows where.
Sounds like the beginning of a plan.
Got the Reginald Lewis Museum down in Baltimore. There are a lot of places that might welcome something as striking as this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Price. I'm very happy that you're joining us. You and your family are joining us. This is a big deal for us that a descendant of Lewis Latimer is joining us this evening. Thank you so much. And the fact that you just spoke that into existence means that we got to get ready. It's going to travel.
Right. Thank you all for the nice comments in the chat. Right, if there isn't any further questions or comment, Shervone and Brian from Beam Center, do you have any last words to share? No?
Shervone said it all as far as I'm concerned.
Just hoping that folks get the chance to, you know, when it's safe, when folks feel safe, that they make their way to visit Beacon. And thank you all for joining us this evening.